Okay, I hit record, and I am with VE Aaron Griffith, and I asked very nicely if I could call you Aaron before we started because and I'm glad you said yes because I would never get the VE right. About 2/3 of the way through, I'd be like, "So Aaron," and people would be like, "That's not his name's VE." Anyway, sorry. Um, so Aaron, you are a three-story method editor with
Yes, I
me.
am.
You've been on we had a podcast recently where you talked about character wants and needs. Were you
Yes.
on that was your first one though, right? Or were you on one before that?
No, I was on one before that, and I did the book club. I've been on your
You've been
podcast.
on a couple times. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, you were on the book club, which for the most recent one we did, and then you were on why can't I even remember the name of that book? Network Effect.
Brilliant. See.
Yeah, I kept wanting to say Social Network because I listened to an interview with Aaron Garfield this morning, and so I was like, "You're on Social Network," but you weren't. You're on the Network Effect. Yeah, so you've been around. Everybody knows you. You've been around for a while. I don't even need to introduce you. And we're gonna look at a piece from a book you sent me because you're kind to let me play around with one of your pieces. So tell us a little bit about the book.
This is an urban fantasy. What you're looking at is currently labeled Chapter 5, but that's going to change. Um, it's it's the first. I'm using the three-story method, of course, and it's the first sort of lead up to his first big choice.
Nice. Yeah, yeah. And it's so Hal is the main character, and
Hale.
Hale is the main character, and he's a trucker, and he's trying to decide. He's living in his truck. He's trying to decide where to go stay. He goes to hang out with this woman, and she gives him an invitation at the end. So I'm kind of working through the beats so that as we talk about it, people can follow along. She gives him an invitation at the end to join, not necessarily join the magical order, but just kind of, I
Come
guess
hang
it is join the
about
magical order. What'd you say?
come hang out and learn about his power.
Yeah, come hang out and learn about his power. It's not an official like you will be the Orson Society is the magical order. It's not an official like you will be um a master wizard, Harry. It's just a like,
Yeah.
you can come hang with us a little bit more. Yeah.
Check us out, see what you think.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm gonna put it on the screen because people would rather look at it than us if they're watching on YouTube. So a couple things I love about it right off the bat. I absolutely love that it is I love the two character voices. You've got really great character voices. Hale is very much he reminded me very much of like a Jack Burton from Big Trouble Little China. Is that kind of what you were going for?
He's actually very much me because I'm a delivery driver myself.
Nice. So just writing
Yeah.
yourself. That's awesome.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
What you know, right? You know?
Yeah, so I liked his voice a lot. It's very strong and clear. That makes sense if you're kind of writing your own voice in there. What's the female character's name? I'm
Kelsey Close.
Kelsey. That's right, Kelsey. Thank you. I kept wanting to say Kitty. I was like, it's not Kitty. Kitty was the character I was writing 5 minutes ago for the Vela before we jumped on here. So Kelsey. Yeah, and Kelsey's voice is really great too. And what's nice that you've done is that the two voices are very different. Hale is very like focused on immediate needs, and he's his sentences are pretty short, right? Like his cadence is kind of one sentence at a time. It's pretty short, and he's pretty blunt. He doesn't like bounce around a lot. He's just kind of like straight and to the point, a straight shooter, as they would say, as I just said. And Kelsey is she's using more complex sentence structure, which is nice. She's using bigger, kind of more educated words, which definitely separates her from Hale. It's not like Hale speaking like a dummy, but Kelsey's using just a little bit of higher level words, so it kind of pushes their voices apart, and it makes this two-person scene really stand out well. I love that. I also loved that the scene is mostly dialogue driven. That's fantastic. This would be, and you're doing a lot of world building in this scene, so it'd be easy to like just make it all well. And so for the first part of the scene, Hale's alone, It would have been really easy just to describe him walking around in a world alone. You didn't do that. You have him talking the whole time, which is great, which we can get into. And then in the second half, their conversation does a ton of world building. So you're using dialogue to world build, which I also really love. So yeah, I think it's a great piece. It's super readable. So I really appreciated you passing it on. Did you intentionally, is Kelsey's voice based on somebody?
No, not really. I honestly, I thought of it as monomouth.
Interesting. No, I think, well, there's some places where they blend.
Yeah.
Yeah. And let's get into that. I think we just, for this one, I think we just take it in order because the issues kind of are naturally grouped into places. So
Okay.
I think, and again, you know, you give me something to edit and I'm going to pick at it. This is a super readable piece. I know you said it's your first draft. I'd be really proud of this first draft. It's a really solid first draft. Just to encourage you before I start like doing my like nitpicky thing. Okay, so let's talk POV. What's the POV of the story?
It's Montington's POV. And we're doing third person. That bit where you said there was a point of view shift.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sentence right there, just above. That was intended as him thinking to himself, and so maybe I need a tag.
Yeah, you just got to note it. You just got to tag it. Yeah, so you have this piece, just to fill in people listening. You have this piece that's like, the next morning he considered his options again. As long as he continued sleeping in the car, he continued to attract cops. We started running into the same one several times. They'd arrest him for vagrancy and impound his car as a punishment for living. Great, like opening paragraph sets up the conflict right away, right? Like there's immediately a problem he has to solve. And then you have this line, I could call that chick. Maybe I'll wind up in Thistle Hill. That'd be cool. I'll shoot her a text. So you just got to note that he's thinking that, because as it stands alone, it feels like this weird shift in POV. So I just pop it in, but it is, you can kind of see what so part of what I really like about what you've done here is he is alone in a truck, right? But you're giving him, even though it's an internal vocalization, you're giving him a vocalization, which immediately connects me to his voice. Does that make sense? Like it engages me in a deeper way, bringing me into the scene instead of like watching the scene from afar. So and you do that all the way through here. You do it again here. He parked on the street and looked at the building. This isn't Thistle Hill, he muttered. So like using those like vocalizations to express his feelings about things. Or down here, you have this like the brick facade was discolored from years of sun and pollution, looked dirty, red, brown, no doubt stained by particulates from cars. Just my luck, he muttered. Still better than the car, right? Like, so you've got that like vocalization expressing how he feels about the building that he's looking at. It really keeps the piece moving, because you can just see visually without here and here and here, if you imagine those being taken out, you just have these solid paragraphs of text, which are, less engaging. It's that vocalization breaking up the story for the reader with like the emotionality of telling us how he feels about what's going on. So nice job, man. Those were really great.
Thank you.
Do you do a dialogue centric first draft?
No,
Okay.
This scene just happened to be it, and because we're doing dialogue here, I picked a dialogue heavy, early scene.
Nice. Well, it's nice. Good job. Let's talk about the text message. Does he text a lot in the book?
No, no. It's really just going to be this one.
Okay. This is I don't know. You might want to lean into it. It's a nice device of him texting, and you used an underline for the text messages, which I thought was creative and fun.
When I learned manuscript format back when God was a kid, underline becomes, oh my God, I'm going to say it, italic after typesetting.
That's hysterical. So were you underlining these to make them italics?
Yeah, they'll when I finally do them out of Scrivener, underline will change to italic.
No, I'm sad. I'm just kidding.
But this is the only italic I'm planning for the entire manuscript.
Okay, I'll allow it. Actually, I don't know. Him texting is fun, mostly because there's a couple reasons I like him texting. One, texting leads to natural miscommunication because it's that like shortened part, and there is a like
you lose context.
And he's already short in his sentences. So if you give him text messages, it gives the opportunity for a lot of that, like, humorous, like, I'm missing what you're saying, and just some like opportunities for like comedic play on words and stuff like that. So I like it for that reason. I also like it because it already matches his voice, right? Like if we look at how he's thinking up here, I could call that chick, right? 5 words, period. Maybe I'll wind up at Thistle Hill, 7 words, period. That'd be cool. 3 words, period. I'll shoot her a text, 5 words, period, right? Like he's already talking in these like straight to the point, brief sentences. So text messaging is a natural modulation of his voice, which is good, but it could be a very comedic modulation of his voice. I will say, if you decide to bring it in, I would make it look more like text messages. So right now you have like, you were right, comma, he typed, she tossed me, what now? He said, staring blankly at passing traffic, sweltering in the heat, until her reply arrived a few minutes later. Come to my apartment, period. I'm home now, comma, so just come up. She gave him an address and he drove over. So people rarely use commas in full sentences in text messages, right? Like it's just, when we text, we speak differently. So I think you could do that. And the other thing is, if you're going to give me a text message conversation, you got to give me the whole conversation. You can't summarize the last piece of the conversation in it. So it's something like, you were right, period. She tossed me, period. And then let her respond, right? Like, told you, or like big surprise, something short. And then, help, question mark, come over, period. I'm home, period. Just come up, period. And then like, something like, where, space R, space U, question mark, and then she can give the address. So part of the reason I want you to transform that, using text messages more with him, I think would be good, but also making it look like we would see a text message. I'd expect it to be indented a little bit. I think putting it in italics is great, actually, because it sets it apart as something else. But I'd pull out this, like, anytime you want to summarize text messaging, I just go ahead and give it to us. It's kind of like summarizing a conversation. You already started it. Just give it all. Just give it to us. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I was kind of going for the idea that I don't want it to be necessarily any place specific. So it's the more addresses you make up, the more you got to think about it.
That's true. And the more post-it notes I need on my computer to remember where the hell everything is. Yeah,
exactly.
That's super true. What's the obsession with Thistle Hill? Can I ask?
Well, Thistle Hill is actually a real place here in Fort Worth where I live. And it's an old cattle baron's mansion. And so I'm using it as this magical, nice, mansion looking building.
Nice.
But it's a landmark that everybody in town knows about. You don't know the address, Thistle Hill, where it is and what it is. And
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very cool. I always use all of my, I'm terrible at writing setting. I'm just really bad at it. So I always use real buildings too. Like all of my books, the locations are all real. They're all in downtown Baltimore. Except the Vela I'm writing right now, because that one takes place in a state that I've never been to. But I do use Google Maps a lot. Like, oh, look at this. So any thoughts on the text message before I move on to something else?
No, I think you're right. I'll probably give it Thistle Hill's actual address on Pennsylvania.
Yeah, why not? It's not like part of me lives in this weird dream where I'm like, someday my urban fantasy series is really going to sell and people are really going to want to visit these places that I wrote about. So actually in one of my books, I like actually have a walking marathon where two of the characters walk this loop through the city because they're like on patrol. So they're like walking this loop through the city. And I've always thought like, man, I wonder if like someday people would race that. Now I think I've sold maybe 75 copies of that book total. So, maybe because there's a whole chapter where two characters are just walking in a big circle, but I live in hope. So I think there's something fun about using real locations in places. It just adds, especially, I have had Baltimore people who have read this series come up to me and be like, I have been at that restaurant and I love that you put it in there. Like, who does that is Laura Lippman, who writes the Tess McGonigan series, which I absolutely love. She's a super amazing Baltimore detective writer, but they're always going out to eat. And like Tess is always going to restaurants and stuff. And all the restaurants that Tess likes are real, which is fun. If she doesn't like a restaurant, it's fake. But if she likes a restaurant, it's real. Okay, let's get into here. So I rearranged the sentence structure here. And the reason I rearranged the sentence structure is because you have this great utterance of, oh God, he complained. Or did I add that? I can't remember if I added that or if
You added that.
I added that. I want an utterance here. That's what I was going to say. I want an utterance here where he's like he's been doing before, where he's expressing how he feels about what he's seeing. So you've got this place where he's going up the stairs, and the stairs are awful. They smell like urine. There's at one point rats come, like he pauses to take a breath and rats show up to investigate him. So originally you had the description of the stairwell, with the phrase with all this gibberish on the walls, and the only phrase he can read is Tasha got pregnant here, which is I laughed out loud. So, and then you've got him. Then you shifted to the smell and how the smell felt. And then you had him climbing, right? Resting at each landing for him to be in better shape. Then you have him pause and several rats come to investigate. And then he climbed, he saw a number of roaches on the walls and the floors. So I love all of those details. I think they're great. I want to go like big to small. And I want to know how he's feeling. So I'm going to put that utterance in there to know how he's feeling. So I'm just going to take that first, the general, right? He went slowly resting, explaining his weight and ill health punished him for not being in better shape. And then the next like general statement you had were about the roaches climbing on the floor. And why I say general is because it's not like he saw one roach. It's like he's seeing all these roaches. So I'm going to go like the next stage in. Roaches furiously ran across the walls and the floors. Oh God, he complained and then I'm going to get to the urine smell, which is the next general thing. Oh God, he complained at the urine smell, which was only intensifying as he climbed. And so, we've got like the big picture of like what he's doing as he climbs up the stairs. And then we've got the like general, like he's seeing roaches everywhere. And then we've got the like, he smells it, the urine is getting stronger as he climbs up each flight, which is like you can see is even more specific. And then finally he's going to pause and he's going to see the rat, right? He paused and several rats came to investigate. Well, like so now this is a fantastic detail. He pauses and several rats came to investigate. You got to have him talk to the rats. He's got to interact with the rats. He can't like, if you pause in a stairway and all these rats come run up and look at you, you're going to respond to the rats. And in essence, like you've given me a character in the hallway, right? Like the rats are this character in the hallway. And when a new character is introduced, I have to know how my POV character is going to respond to that character, not just because it tells me something about the moment, but it also tells me something about my POV character. Okay. So if he's scared of rats, right? Like if he's Indiana Jones and he's going to start like kicking the rats. Oh God, I hate rats. Oh God, I hate rats. Right? Like, or does Indiana Jones hate snakes? I don't remember.
Yeah, it's snakes.
He hates snakes. Okay. So if he's going to be afraid of the snakes, then but he's fine with rats. Like that's something we need to know. Is he going to like joke with the rats about his weight? Is he gonna like tease the rats about his health, right? Like, is he going to threaten the rats? That would be a very like Big Trouble in Little China Jack Burton, Kurt Russell thing to do, right? Like, so what's he? How's his? Or is he gonna like? Actually, Jack Burton would probably sympathize with the rats. Like, I don't know how you stand the smell of this place. The rats ran off, right? Like, but it doesn't need to be quick. We just need something, some kind of vocalization here to tell us like a little bit about him, right? Like, because that's not the point. Isn't that I necessarily, I mean, there's a fun possible moment where he's talking to rats, but that's not the point. The point is that like I get to know him better in this moment as he's like huffing and puffing up these stairs. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Any thoughts about that?
No, I'm not sure how he'd react to rats. He's lived sort of a downtrodden life, so that he wouldn't necessarily be afraid of them. Although these ones are pretty bold because they're out during the day.
Yeah.
You know, but it could happen. So
yeah, well, I mean, I used to live in Baltimore City, which has a rat problem. And we'd get them in the day because, and the rat experts would always be like, yeah, they're out here during the day because there's too many of them to eat at night. So there's some of them have to like switch their sleeping times. Rats are nocturnal, if any listeners don't know that. And I used to talk to him at night. We didn't have a backyard. We had a back slab. It was like a concrete slab that was like, 5 feet long by 7 feet wide because the house was 7 feet wide. So they used to crawl, like I'd be sitting in the back on my back slab, like smoking a cigar, and I'd get like a train of them just walking through with no care for me. Like they didn't care that I was there at all. It was just kind of like, what's that dude doing here? And then like we had an abandoned row home next to us, so they'd all they lived in the abandoned home next door in the basement. So they'd come like walking by. But yeah, and I'd talk to them. Like, hey guys, how's it going? They just keep walking by. Sometimes if I was feeling snarky, I'd be like, oh, not even to say hello. Okay, let's see how it is. Nice job, neighbors. Anyway, so there's a fun comedic moment with an animal here that's that you could potentially have. And I would think about like, how's he going to respond to rats? I think it's part of his response is about whether you want it to be a callback or not. If rats keep showing up in the book, then you want to figure out how he's going to respond in a way that's a callback, that's a comedic callback, right? Like just looking for those opportunities, especially in like a fun urban fantasy, because urban fantasies tend to have that like, playfulness in them, and like they mix that like playfulness with thriller. So, if you're going to bring rats back, having some kind of callback. If you're not going to bring the rats back. Now, I will say the reason I didn't do this with the roaches is because the roaches don't pause. The roaches are just being roaches, but you gave the rats personality when they paused to look at him. So okay. Like now we have to address them.
Okay.
Right. So if you don't want them to pause to look, like several rats came to investigate. You've given them human qualities, now they're characters, we have to deal with them. But if you don't want to deal with the rats and you want to skip this entire lecture from Jeff about talking to rats, just have them scurry by like the roaches. I'll stop talking about rats now because I'm grossing myself out. Yeah, so here you've got this nice, this is a setting thing. And I do this all the time. He gets to her door. She says, come on in. Well, he gets to her door and he goes to knock on it and it swings open as he touches it because it's like, and then he says like, oh, he notices the broken latch. And then she says, come in. I left it open for you. He says, thanks. And he steps inside. He's like, how do you keep people out? And then she says, you can lock the door so it won't swing open again. That way you can stare at me in private. And then you move on into the scene and you never tell me how he can lock the door if the latch is broken. So, but this is one of those details that is going to piss readers off and drive them crazy because they're going to be like, even though you and I don't care, it doesn't matter for the rest of the story. It has nothing to do with the scene we're going into, but there's a logical inconsistency and some reader is going to leave you a review about, I mean, the book was great, except the door doesn't lock. So like, you got it. So I just need a visualization here. And again, it's like the rat, right? Like if you don't give me these details, I don't actually care about the door. But because she said you can lock it, I need to know how he can lock it with the latch broken. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So does the and it's one of those things of like, if you
And
don't want to deal with it, just don't tell her, don't say he can lock it, right? Like,
that's exactly the kind of detail I would notice.
yeah, I was a reader, you
Yeah.
would. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Exactly.
And I'd probably stop reading and I'd put it down and like, oh, like I'd be a jerk about it, even though I make these probably errors all the time in my own writing. But yeah, it's just that kind of like there. Okay, here's another place where I want more. So these two notes kind of go together, and the rat all go together in that, like, what we're actually editing is I'm asking for more detail to empower the reader's imagination, right? So the door, because philosophically, when we talk about like what's happening when we're writing a book, we're trying to put a movie in the reader's head, right? To speak in modern terms, we're trying to take this story that's in our brain and put it in the reader's brain. And so there's a weird art where the art of writing comes in is in that, like, what is too much or what is too little control over that image in the reader's brain. There's places where there's too much control, where the reader feels burdened by the amount of crap that we're trying to get them to imagine at one time. And then there's too little control where we're not giving them enough. So the rat pausing to investigate. I want more. I want more. I want to know more of what's happening in your brain than what you gave me. The lock on the door, right? Like, you've got something going on here in your head as the storyteller. I want to know what that is. I want more. This is another place where, like, oh, I want more. I want to know. I want more help imagining. So he says this is a nice place. Surprised, she didn't stand, but turned in a friendly manner and made him feel comfortable. For some reason, he couldn't put his finger on it. Friendly manner is hard for me to imagine. I want to know what that is. How is she turning in a friendly manner? So give me the body language, right? Like, beat it out for me, right? Like, looking over her shoulder, she swung her hair back and smiled.
Okay. Yeah.
He felt comfortable and uncomfortable at the same time. Yeah,
Yeah.
like, but just give me the actual body language to tell me how she's turning. But it's all about, like, helping me as the reader imagine what's happening there and where she is. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. That's just a grammar thing. We don't need to talk about that. That's not fun. We're only gonna talk about the fun things. This is another one where, like, I want you to help me imagine what's going on. She lays on her couch. Originally had her wrote, she lays on her couch across a small, she lay on her own couch across a small table from him, dressed in knee-length shorts and another pleasant top. And then you had clearing his throat. He worked to keep his eye on his face. He couldn't help but notice her low-cut top left the cleft of her breast visible, her smooth thighs and strong calves, and her feet bare. So what's happening here is you give me her position, he clears his throat, and then you give me more about her position. So I'm going to take her position, I'm going to put it all together so that I can get the full image of what she's doing and where she is. And then I can get his response. And this is, we talk about dialogue as like, well, so when we talk about dialogue, we talk about the need for a call and response. One, especially in a 2-character scene, right? You've got a two-person scene. One character does something, the other character responds, this character responds, this character responds, right? We need that back and forth from the 2 characters. Dialogue isn't just the words they say. I mean, it is, but the back and forth needs to apply not just to the words they say, because, we're not actually in it for the words they say. We're in it for the character engagement and the exchange of emotions and expectations between the 2 characters. So the reason we focus on dialogue and the reason we focus on what they're saying is because the words that come out of our mouth tend to be the purest expression of emotion that we have, right? Like that, like, drives our expectations and wants. We speak it because we're verbal creatures. But here We need that back and forth. And we don't want to like break it up. We want to get what she's doing, his response, and then her response. So, you know, putting it back together, she lay on the couch with a small table for him. She was dressed in knee-length shorts and a pleasant top. He couldn't help but notice how low cut top left the cleft of her breast visible, her smooth size, strong calves, her bare feet. Clearing his throat, he worked to keep his eyes on his face. So we get like, here's what she's doing. Here's how she looks. Here's what he's doing. She rolled her eyes as a grin spread across her face. Here's what she's doing, right? Like, so we're getting that like exchange of expectations and emotions, even though we don't have any verbalization yet. And then here we have an issue because we need to either put these two lines together on the same paragraph because they're both her, or we need to insert something that he's going to say. So she rolls her eyes and spreads a grin across her face. You can drop the pretense I dressed like this for you. She flashed a slight grin. So like, I would just get those on the same line. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that was a formatting. That was a formatting decision. I was, again, back in the day, I was taught that you always, when you go to a quote, you always start a new paragraph.
You always start, yeah. And yes, that I see that a lot. That may even be the proper way to format. Because I'm obsessed with the give and take of characters, I put these together because I actually consider this part of the dialogue, right? If you were saying like, she interrupted, you can't drop the pretense. I might put the she interrupted, like you're going to likely put the she interrupted there. Or if you're like, Sally said, blah, 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 you're going to put the Sally said there. I consider this as that Sally said.
Okay.
Does that make sense? But yeah, you are right in that, like, a lot of formatting will tell you start the new paragraph on the quote. I consider this part of that quote.
Okay.
Because it's part of the back and forth.
I can think of how to rewrite it and do it. Yeah, and do it both my sense of correctly and your sense of together.
Yeah. And you know, you don't necessarily need to satisfy my terrible grammar, but wanting the more back and forth. I'm gonna get letters from editors now. You're formatting that wrong. I know. But I like to keep it together because, again, I'm going to put imagination of the reader over like grammatical correctness, especially when the grammatical correctness I feel like is in the way. So putting these two lines together gives me a better back and like picture of the back and forth. And like, yeah, anyway, do what you will, reader. Oh, listen. I don't know why people let me talk about this stuff anyway. Okay, so this is all great. These are just little tiny notes that aren't fun to talk about. So here we start to get, here's where we start to get like monomouth. And the reason you're getting monomouth is because the two voices start to merge together. And which is really common in a first draft where you're writing fast and you're writing this like exchange between the two characters. They start to sound alike. So we just want to pull them apart, right? So this is a great example of their two voices, right? Like you can drop the pretense. Pretense is a more educated word, right? It's good that Kelsey has it. I dress like this for you. What? You want me to bang you already? Right? Like, again, direct, short sentences to the point, not messing around. No, Hale, I just know. And then you give her a paragraph, right? Like, so we're getting that like more educated. Her cadence is longer. She talks around things a lot, whereas he's straight and to the point and like short sentences. So no, Hale, I just know more about you than you realize. And one thing is, I know you respond positively to women you find attractive. In this context, I want to be that. Plus, you're trying not to be too gross about it, and that makes it flattering. We get his voice again. It's flattering that I eyeballed you, right? Again, to the point, straight out, expressing his like desires in the conversation. One sentence. Women deal with it a lot. You don't catcall, wolf, whistle, stick your tongue out, nothing like that. And so again, her cadence is longer. She wants to continue here for a full paragraph, but he's going to cut her off. That crap is nasty, he interrupted. I hate guys that do that. Short sentences to the point. So do I. you look, but you don't, yeah, you look, but you don't do more than that, at least aware without reading your mind. I appreciate your discretion. Also, great comments from her, right? Like, so this is that voice that we want to hear. When we scan down here, where did I just saw it with my eye? It's lower. Where'd it go? I forgot. I'll find it. Anyway, all that to say, you've got really good voices coming forward. I would try to write those down somewhere, like the descriptions of what you're looking for in voices, so that you can have that, you can keep coming back to them, right? Because you're probably going to write like 2 or 3 chapters without Kelsey, and you're going to try to come back to her voice, and she's going to end up sounding just like he does. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So great voices. I like the change in cadence that you're doing. I like the change in language that they both have. Yeah, it's really good. Couple notes on the voices though. Sorry, now I lost where I am. Here I am. Okay. There's a weird logical inconsistency where he texted her to come over, but now she's saying that she brought him over. It, from this point on, it runs through the rest of the chapter. But again, that's not a big, it's just something that needs to be fixed. Does that make sense?
Yeah, there's a previous scene where she invites him over.
Oh, okay.
So, you know,
Yeah.
it's like he's accepting the invitation, but it's still, why am I here? He doesn't
Gotcha.
just text her out of the blue.
Yeah, ignore that comment then, because that's just me only having one chapter. Yeah, so here, this is something that you did a couple times that, you know, I always, is when I'm editing, I just tend to pull out. We rarely say these opening sentences. So he says, or she says, context. Like, for example, there was a reason you brought that package to me. It wasn't just chance. And then you had him say, no, it wasn't. It was Day being a prick and sending me on a shit run. We usually don't say, no, it wasn't. And it just adds to the realism if we pull it out. It also gives that, like, it'll start to speed up the dialogue a little bit by getting those little utterances out. So pulling, or like this one here, there's more you need to know. She's saying there's more you need to know in the next sentence. So we don't need it, right? Like, just pull it out. He's saying, no, it wasn't, in the next sentence. So we don't need it. Just pull it out. And a lot of times when we're talking, we think that and we don't say it out loud. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it just makes it a little faster. Here, I'm going to add this line because you're getting into a really good back and forth here, right? Like, you're kind of done describing the scenery. You're done describing how their body language. You're now in this just like popping back and forth, and you're just adding body language in here to explain how the utterance should be heard, which is great, right? Like, this is kind of like really classic, really strong back and forth dialogue between two characters. So I want to start breaking these utterances up to make them a little bit quicker, which is tough with a character like her who speaks in paragraphs. But giving him, so putting in more utterances from him is going to pick up the speed. And I know it sounds weird to say adding more shorter lines makes it read faster, but it does, because it gives you that back and forth between the two characters. So it makes it feel, you know, very Aaron Sorkin-esque popping. So for example, down here, you know, you had this paragraph a lot longer than you understand at this point. Hale, he's one of the oldest men in the world, but that's beside the point. The Orson Society is here. We don't guide or try to rule the world, but we do protect it. From what? More like from who? And then you had a paragraph here, more like from who, but that's not the point right now. We need to talk about your situation, right? So I want that speed here, because like, she gave me a paragraph and now I want to sit in it a little bit. and I want the reader to kind of live with it. So from what? More like from who? Okay, from who? That's not the point right now. What is the point then? We need to talk about your situation, right? Your little society is going to buy me a palace, right? Like, so getting that like clipped back and forth picks up the speed and lets us dwell in the moment a little bit more. That like interchange between the characters. It does break her voice, right? Like, but it's not, it's more a modulation of just like the flow of conversation. As long as you're coming back to these larger paragraphs for her, it'll feel fine. Does that make sense? Because
Yeah.
she's interacting, the modulation is she's interacting with him on this like question that he's got.
Mhm.
Okay, that's a lot about character voices. How do you feel about all of
I
that? Any thoughts or
I like it,
effects?
and believe it or not, it was not quite as intentional as you seem to believe that it was.
I'm going to continue to believe that
It's just,
Aaron mastered character voices before he sent this to me and rocked it out.
well, this is. I mean, it was certainly something that I thought about, but I'm also in a position where I'm just trying to get the darn thing written, and then I'll go back and do character voices a pass later.
Yeah. So I think I think with character voices, and I want to I want to dwell here for a second because I know, people listening are going to be like, Jeff is counting sentences and words and that's stressful and I can barely just finish a scene. What are you doing? So just to speak to that for a second. When I learned to play baseball, right? Like the pitcher threw the ball and the coach gave me a bat and he showed me kind of like, hey, here's kind of how you swing it. And then you just take 1,000 swings and finally you figure out how to hit. And then when I got to the college level, I got in a batting cage and they were like, hit this ball. Like, we're going to turn this machine on and the balls are just going to come at you. And you stay in here until you fixed your stride. And so I was literally working on the weight between my feet and how I move my left foot, just a step forward. And I did it for an hour and a half, right? Like, now, are there amazing hitters that are 1,000 times better than me that never think about how their step moves forward? Absolutely. Right. Like, I would say most great hitters are that way. And then you have guys like me who have to turn the freaking swing into math because it doesn't make sense. So that being said, whatever works for you, right? Like, if you're going to get a picture of an actor, imagine that actor's voice, and that gets you different voices, fantastic. If you need to fill out charts like I do, fantastic. If it's just natural, you can just hear it, fantastic. Like, whatever works. So I think it's great that you've kind of unconsciously written these two voices because you're imagining the characters. I think that's awesome. We just want to make sure that it stays consistent through the book because you have two really great voices, so we want to keep them consistent like that. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And it matches with the personalities you've given them because she's got her crap together, right? Like, she's part of this magic society. She's got this clean apartment that she's taking care of, even in this like dystopian world. She seems to understand that she's magical, and like she's got, at least on the surface level, she's got her crap together. He's living in a truck. He's never actually used his magic. He doesn't know what's going on, right? Like, so that he's speaking in one sentences and dealing with his immediate needs actually fits his personality. So the voices, part of what's nice about the voices, they express to me who the characters are, which is great because we want our character voice to be that like visible expression of the character's personality. So yeah. Here we start to lose the back and forth a little bit, and this happens a lot in world building. So a lot of times when we're world building, we get engaged in like building the world, and we stop losing the fact that like what the reader actually cares about is the back and forth. The reader doesn't care about the world building. The reader cares about the back and forth. So she shifts her weight, right? Shifts her weight again, raising one knee, and this time her shorts slide up her leg, exposing even more thigh. We get her. He says, please stop that. And you had this all together. Please stop that. He said, you're not my wife or my love interest. Yes, you're sexy as hell, and I love you to do dirty things, but that's not what we're doing here. This is a really long paragraph for him. right? Like this is actually what I saw with my eye that I was trying to get back to earlier. This is a really long paragraph for him that is outside of his character voice. Please stop that is in his character voice, right? Give us her response. You're sexy as hell, and I'd love to do dirty things to you, but that's not what we're doing here. That is also in his character voice. That sentence is a little long for him, but he's directly expressing how he feels, right? Like he's right in there. And then, I'm sorry, that one wasn't intentional. And then you had her saying, I'll try. Okay, she continued lowering her leg and pulling her shirts down a bit. Give us his response. I'm sorry, that one wasn't intentional. How does he respond? Right? Like, because we're here for the back and forth. And then let her come back with, okay, she continued lowering her leg. Right? Like, so we can still feel that interaction between them because that's what we're showing up for. Right? Like, you've got world building happening here where she's about to explain the Orson Society and what it is. But, and that's fun. But what we're actually here for is this right here, right? Like we're here for the characters giving, for Kelsey and Hale flirting, not flirting, being uncomfortable with each other. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Down here too, right? Like you drop all this world building on us, but we're not actually here for the world building. We're here for their interactions around the world building. So she tells us the Orson Society is one of 3 great magical societies. We operate mostly hidden from the world, which is why you haven't ever heard of us. But we're always there, making sure you go right and that the other societies don't abuse their powers. And then you had him asking, where does the name come from? Sounds like something out of World of Worlds. And then she starts talking about the name and this guy Orson. So I can see that, like, as the writer, you were like, I need to transition to talk. I've got more world building to get out. I need him to ask a question to get into this more world building. But that's not how we really talk, right? Like, at this point, I was like, oh, now Hale is interviewing her about the Orson Society. So we need to keep it feeling realistic. Let her give her paragraph out. Works fine for her voice. It's great. Let him say something about what she just said. Let her say something about what he said. Let him say something about what her said. Let her say something. And then let him be like, where does the name come from? Right? Like, but let them interact around this big paragraph that she just dropped a little bit. Just for that realism's sake. Does that make sense? Because she just said a lot, right? Like there's so like things that she dropped on him in this paragraph. There's magical societies. There's 3 of them. Hers is hidden, which is why you haven't heard of them. And they're kind of like the cops, right? Like that's a lot. He's going to talk about that. Right? Like he's going to clarify some things. He's probably going to crack a joke. He's probably going to say something about, are they all as sexy as you are? Right? Like he's going to have his, like, you know, moment of commenting, and then we can move on to where does the name come from? Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. That I don't want to talk about that. That's just a grammar thing, and you can read that on your own. We already talked about this. Were you going to say something? Sorry, I was just rolling.
No, go ahead.
Okay. Oh, so here you're still world building for me, which is great. But you drop this big detail on me that he knows he's magic. Do we know this before, or is this the first time we're hearing this?
I don't remember.
Okay.
There is a place where we could drop it, but I don't remember.
Okay. There are no rules, right? Like, so let me just say that up front. There's no, like, this is the way you have to do it. Generally, I would say in a conversation, world build around one thing at a time. So if you're gonna talk about the Orson Society, this chapter is about the Orson Society. If you want to have a chapter about his mom and how she thought about magic and how he, surprise, he was magic too, then that has to be another chapter. You're going to talk about that somewhere else. At some point, Kelsey needs to ask him in another chapter, like, you know, you do know your magic, right? And then we can have this whole conversation about his mom. He can talk about his mom. He can talk about why she didn't why she refused. She can talk about the cost. Kelsey can comment on the cost, right? Like they can go back and forth about how much magic school costs as a kid, and we can learn about Kelsey's magic school, right? Like we can do this whole conversation that you're summarizing in a paragraph here, right? But when you throw it in here like this, like his internal monologue around his own experiences with magic, the reader, I know I as a reader was like, okay, like, slow the track down. Like, how much stuff are you going to dump on me in one chapter? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And again, it's just reader burden. We want to make it easy. We want to allow them to keep. They're still trying to remember who Orson is, and they're trying to figure out how old he is and what's going on there. They're wondering if Jack, I mean, if Hale. See, I'm calling him Jack Burton in my head. They're wondering if Hale has a place to sleep at night, right? Like all of those things. So this is too much. Put it somewhere else. I would recommend before we get here, but if this is the first time, see, but if this is the first time you're introducing magic, he needs to know more about it. Oh, it's not? Okay, great.
No, it's not.
Yeah. So throw this somewhere else. Get it out of my Orson Society chapter. Yeah. This was all fine. This is just me playing with language. Yeah, here's another place where I want you to help me imagine him. He considered, and she waited, letting the silence stretch between them. So she gives him this invitation, and then you have this sentence, which is a nice pause, right? Like, I really like what you're doing conversationally here, where he doesn't answer her. He just is like thinking about it. But you need to tell me what he's doing, because in my imagination, they are both frozen statues. Which Hale is not a frozen statue. He would never sit still as a frozen statue, right? Like that's not the character he's written. So he needs to play with a watch. He needs to, like, you know, look out. If he's contemplative, he needs to look outside and admire the buildings. If he's fidgety, he needs to like play with his watch. If he's uncomfortable and anxious, he needs to stand up and walk around. If he's, you know, if you're going to keep this like horny line, he needs to look at her and decide whether or not, like, you know, is it worth it just hanging out with her, right? Like, you know, the positive. And we need that, like, you know, him like looking at her, oogling her again, and her just waiting for him to stop, right? Like, but this moment is a big moment, so let us live in it and help us imagine it a little bit more. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, this is me also not understanding the previous chapter. So those were my notes, man. I thought overall it's great. I want, there's places where I want more imagination, right? There's places where I want more back and forth, and I want you to like speed it up and slow it down at the same time. I want shorter exchanges so it moves faster, but slowing it down so that we live in that moment a little bit more. And then I want you to only world build one thing at a time. So you don't stress readers like me out. I'm like, oh crap, now I gotta, it's like Game of Thrones. Now I gotta go get out a tablet, start writing down these freaking names, because there's like 50 names per chapter. So I gotta like make a family tree. So anyway, that's
I want to write the 100,000 or the million word series where you have to have a wiki to keep track of it.
Oh dude, did you do the Game of Thrones? Did you read Game of Thrones?
No, I didn't do Game of Thrones. I did Wheel of Time, which is 15 books.
Yeah.
14 books. Yeah.
I've heard it's just as bad, but
I did the audiobooks, and it's 460 hours.
Oh my gosh. That's insane. Oh man. I guess if you're driving a delivery truck, you got the time.
I got the time. Yeah. I one time I've done it several times. One time I did it delivering pizza.
Nice. That's awesome. Yeah, I read this was before the movies. I was doing a wedding. I wasn't working as a pastor anymore, but I was trying to pick up side money because I was working as a secretary in this like weird office. That's another story for another time. And I like trying to just get money. So like people would be like, hey, would you marry us? Be like, yeah, sure, $50. Take my wife out on a date. So I married this one couple, and the groomsmen right before the wedding were all like obsessing over the Game of Thrones novels. And I was like, I gotta try one of those. So I got in like they talked so much about the ending of the first novel that I was like, I was sold. I was like, okay, I'm going to read to the end of this thing. But I got into it and I was like, oh, what is happening? I need maps, I need charts, I need family diagrams, I need like how many names are we gonna drop, which of these do I actually have to remember? So I like Googled, I was like Game of Thrones names, and a wiki came up because other
Yeah.
fans evidently had the same problem, and they were, all of this like design. But yeah, hey man, kudos for writing an amazing series that people will create internet pages about. Living the dream. Yeah. All right. Anything else you want to talk about with the piece? Anything we didn't cover? Sorry, I think you're on mute. There you
Sorry, I don't think so. I think we did good.
go. Okay. Awesome. Thanks again for sharing it with me, man.
No problem. Thank you for doing this.
Yeah. When's it coming out? Do you know?
No.
Okay. You're like, I've only written 5 chapters, Jeff. Leave me alone.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm ready. I'm ready to read it whenever it comes out. Yeah, it's great. Where can people find your stuff if they want to go look at what you've written?
Griffith.com.
vgriffith.com. Okay. I'm going to stop the recording and we can chat a little bit more.